It is another interesting edition of the Economy and Politics Show, which is dedicated to the discourse on key developments in the economy as it affects the households. The focus of our conversation today will be on Nigeria, agribusiness, and the competitive economy in 2022. Our guest is Mr. Chuka Mordi, the CEO of Ellah PLC. It is great to have you on the program today, Mr. Chuka.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Before we begin this conversation, let us give you a wrap of key developments that occurred in the economy from last week. President Muhammadu Buhari led other eminent Nigerians to pay tribute to the former head of the interim government of the Federation, Chief Ernest Shonekan, GCFR, who passed on at the age of 85. Also last week, President Buhari recently endorsed the establishment of the Nigeria Diaspora Investment Trust Fund, a private sector investment window with Nigerians in the diaspora to support direct investments in the country. The agriculture, ICT, manufacturing, and financial services have been listed among sectors that will drive economic growth in 2022. Mr. Bismarck Rewani, CEO of Financial Derivatives Company, made this point at the Nigeria Economic Outlook Forum organized by the Nigeria British Chamber of Commerce. We go on a breather, and when we return, it will be a full stretch.
Tune in to Web TV Daily to stay up to date and informed on the financial market, personal finance, and more. We have got you covered with all your favorite TV shows, economy and politics, market review, women's series, millennial talk, Islamic Finance Weekly, The Brief, exclusive interviews, events, and we keep you up to date on all the updates in the financial market with the market opening gong. Watch premium content. Watch Web TV. Same news, different perspective.
Welcome back. If you're joining us, it is the Economy and Politics Show, and our guest today is Mr. Chuka Mordi, CEO of Ellah PLC. Mr. Chuka, let's first begin with the recent agri policy that was rolled out late last year by the Minister of Agriculture. As a stakeholder, what's your perspective on this as it has to do with driving competitiveness and creating value through the agro sector?
Thank you very much for that question. I think, yes, my view is it's a very important policy document that was much needed in terms of trying to improve the nature of our the agribusiness space in Nigeria. There's a focus on 8 priority goals, which I think is very important, that they tried not to bite off more than they can chew. And also the 6 food crops of priority. Out of the 6 food crops that they decided to focus on, NLX is involved in the production of 4 of them: cassava, maize, rice, and soya bean. I certainly think so, yes. It's a very well thought out, very well articulated plan. I think the team led by Ndidi Nwuneli sort of took their time to study the sector in deep. It shows that they understand the sector in great detail. And the initiatives they've put forward, I think, could certainly help in improving the agribusiness sector in Nigeria tremendously. Of course, it requires also on the government side legislation, policy initiatives, and interventions, which I think will be the key challenge. These need to be driven by the federal government. I think it's easier to get the private sector in line in terms of what you want them to do, but I think the nature of the bureaucracy in the government space will be the major challenge in implementing this new policy framework. Okay. But on the whole, we're grateful for that.
Yeah. And speaking about the private sector and partnership with governments and driving the agribusiness space, last year, Ellah PLC partnered with the Enugu State government on rice processing, published on ProShare. Give us further insight into this. I mean, this is a beautiful development as it has to do with creating value from the agro sector, because it's been more of us producing, but processing has been a challenge.
Yes, it's an opportunity we've been working on for a significant period. It's taken quite a bit of time, but I'm glad that we finally closed the transaction with the state government. It was a fairly convoluted process going through executive council and the technical committee on privatization. As you know, working with state governments is requiring a great deal of patience and understanding of the nature of the bureaucracy of the Nigeria state. But we got there in the end. We've got it done. It involves 5,000 hectares in Adani in Enugu State. We'll be cultivating rice, cassava, soybean, and maize. And our intention is to turn the area into a staple crop processing zone. What we want to do is, from the cassava, ultimately go into producing industrial starch and ethanol. From the maize and soya, we have offtake agreements with already 2 significant industrial producers in Nigeria to sell onto them for production of animal feed. And of course, the rice, we have a processing facility, which we intend to revive on the site. So essentially, it's to engage in cultivation. So I think in terms of jobs, employment for the local community, that's going to be a significant impact.
Mm-hmm. And is Ellah looking at other states in this year? I mean, apart from Enugu, we know other states like Ebonyi that are good in rice, that can cultivate and process. Other products that you've listed, are you looking at more partnerships with other states?
Yes, we certainly are. The focus is not just on rice. In that particular space, we're doing 4 crops. In the last few months, we also closed a partnership deal with Ondo State. So that's 5,000 hectares also. We started land clearing last year. We expect that we should do the land clearing and the land preparation, close that by Q2 this year. And we're focusing on maize and soya and cassava also in that space. And also we have offtake agreements with a variety of industrial producers. So we think we have a market already for whatever we want to produce. Of course, we started out in Edo State. So the plan is to diversify significantly as much as possible. Essentially risk mitigation from a corporate perspective, and take advantage of the import substitution space in Nigeria, which is the key focus of LLX PLC.
It's interesting to see how you evolve from the fish to a fully integrated agro-business firm.
Yes, it's been a long evolution, but we think given the background of Nigerian agriculture space and the potential for growth, I think we think we're going in the right direction.
Yes. Let's look at the year 2022. A lot of interesting opportunities. Like I read earlier in the news, the agricultural sector is part of the sectors that is believed to drive the economic growth this year. So, I mean, we need to start looking at agriculture being a key source of revenue too, not just crude oil. So let's look at issues around subsidies. Stakeholders in your industry have been discussing about this. Some officials who disclosed their name in the Federal Agri Ministry also talked about it. Maybe it's time for government to look at providing subsidies for the sector. What is your view around this?
Well, I think it's a complex issue, and it's not a very simple issue. I think subsidies in terms of trying to encourage growth in local production can be very useful if implemented properly. I think subsidies in conjunction with tariffs, if properly applied, can be helpful in encouraging local growth if they're specifically targeted, one, and if they're implemented properly, two. But I think subsidies applied in a blanket form across an industry is not necessarily very helpful. I think there are things we need to import because we don't have in the agribusiness space, the particular climatic conditions, we don't have the soil. So necessarily we must depend on other countries to import these goods. To try and substitute them by imposing subsidies does not seem to be an economically straightforward way of doing things or reasonable. But in areas where I think there's scope for significant growth in Nigeria, rice, cassava, oil palm, where we have the conditions and where we're restricted by issues such as financing or economic development, I think then if subsidies are applied properly, then they can encourage growth in the cultivation space, but also growth in the processing space where we're trying to add value. Now, if you're processing, the key issues there is not about subsidies, it's about do you have the financing to import heavy industrial machinery and goods to engage in processing? So I think that's a different policy initiative that requires an intervention from the financial side and not necessarily from the subsidy tariff side on the crops themselves. So it can be helpful and can be very useful, but I think we need to apply it judiciously in order for subsidies to be beneficial to the economy at large.
Yeah. And speaking about agro-industrialization, we're seeing funding now coming into Nigeria,
Yes.
like the Africa Development Bank funding of over $200 million for agro-industrial parks.
Yes.
How are players like Ellah
Yes.
and other stakeholders going to begin to leverage this? Because this will really be a good pedestal to deepen activities in the agri-business space.
Yeah, very true. Yes, we noted the announcement by the AFDB at the end of last year. We're currently discussing with the AFDB about a variety of things, and they have a focus on special agri-processing zones, which are identical to what we're doing in the stable crop processing zone. We understand the scale of and the scope of the intervention and the financing. We haven't had a fully articulated picture of the detail of how the financing will be deployed. So we're waiting to see that. But I think the fact that they made such significant commitments is very helpful and very useful. The nature of the financing, whether it's developmental style financing that comes with concessionary rates, or if there's an equity portion to it, we don't know yet. And how they intend to deploy the cash, we don't know yet. But once, I think, in due course, once this is made clear, then we will try to take advantage of it as best as we can.
Yeah. And then finally, financing has been a major issue for the agro sector, and stakeholders want a whole value chain approach. So, for example, all stakeholders will like this intervention of CBN, Central Bank of Nigeria, is good, but getting the whole value chain, ensuring that you're meeting all key stakeholders, the farmers that are there, all the necessary research institutes who help to do research in improving production, and policymakers, including the National Assembly. Everyone needs to come to the table to understand how this financing impacts the whole industry. What would you like to see differently? Because the central bank has done a lot, but the impact is still a challenge in the sector.
Yes, you're right. The central bank has done a lot. There's been the Real Sector Fund, which has been very helpful to a variety of companies. There's a new policy initiative called the 100 for 100, the policy on production and productivity, which I think, if implemented properly, could also be very, very helpful in growing the space. But when you say, what would I like to see differently? I think it's a question of additionality and just improving the linkages. There's the public policy side, and then there's implementation of that public policy, and then there's the private sector side, and the implementation or not efficiently by the public sector has a significant effect on how the private sector either thrives or doesn't. So, I mean, what would I like to see done more would be interaction between the public sector and the private sector in determining policy. So we know that what comes out from the public sector has been discussed with the private sector and is advantageous to them, because that's necessarily what they're trying to affect. So that's why I think, going back to the first question you asked me, the policy on agriculture, the medium-term policy from 2021 to 2025. Ndidi Nwuneli and Sahel, the working group, are primarily private sector, but they did a lot of engagement with the public sector and the states. So I think that's why we have a document that is very helpful and very useful to both sides.
Yeah, I think it's very clear. When you see what has happened in countries like Ethiopia, Senegal, and Morocco, it's very clear that linkage between public and private sector is important, so that issues like financing, developing special agri zones, subsidies, and all those other issues that should enable the agribusiness space become valuable to the country, because we also know that this is a sector that employs more people and is a key driver of growth. Thank you very much, Mr. Chuka Mordi, CEO Ellah PLC, for this interesting conversation.
Thank you very much.
And we hope that 2022 will see competitiveness drive more in the agribusiness space, and it will create more jobs and opportunities for Nigerians. Thank you once again.
We hope so too. Thank you very much.
And that'll be all for this edition of the Economy and Politics Show. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions on Nigeria agribusiness and the competitive economy in 2022, please send them to otobasi.apasekong@proshng.com. Also join our website, www.proshng.com, to read our latest news articles, stories, and reports on the agriculture sector. We have them captured for you. You can engage us on our social media platforms displayed on the screen. Till we come your way again, let's make this happen next Monday. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.